Hey everyone, it's Jory. As you know, this summer I am doing replays of some of the top episodes downloaded from the podcast, and the list would not be complete if I did not include this conversation with Alexandra Solomon talking about getting your sexy back. Ladies, this episode is for you. And if you missed it the first time around, I'm so glad you're tuning in now. And if you heard it the first time around, you're going to get so much more out of it because we go into so much depth in topics of relationships and sex and how to talk to your kids about sex. And we get into some really fun nitty-gritty details that she and I are still talking about how much fun this conversation was. So I really hope you enjoy this replay. Don't forget, there are lots of links in the show notes for you to check out. There is my Get Unstuck assessment, my proprietary quiz to help you uncover which area of your life you are feeling most stuck in. And even though it's not starting until September 9th, it is not too early to join my cohort for the Journey Forward method, which is an 8-week live course on how to get and stay unstuck. The earlier you sign up, the earlier you access, you have to the amazing bonus courses, which are not going to be around forever. And lastly, I still have a few spots in my women's retreat that is going to be at Marival in Tucson, Arizona, September 26th to 29th, where we are going to relax, and it's time to renew and rejuvenate your spirit after what has been a really challenging year and a half. So check out those links in the show notes and enjoy this conversation with Alexandra Solomon.
Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey everyone, it's Jory. Ladies, this episode is especially for you. I guarantee it's going to pique your interest and entice your curiosity about how to improve your relationship and your sex life. And if this is something you're wanting to continue to work more on, please join John and I on our couples retreat in Costa Rica in September. Go to joryrose.com for all the information. Here's this amazing episode. Enjoy.
Hi, and welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. I have been waiting for this conversation today with Alexandra Solomon. I am so looking forward to what's going to unfold. And so, Alexandra, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Please introduce yourself, tell our listeners all about you before we jump on into the juicy stuff I can't wait to talk about.
Sure. I'm so happy to be here. I'm glad that we are connecting like this.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. So I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a professor at Northwestern University where they can't get rid of me. I trained there and have stayed there ever since. So I work with clients, individuals, and couples. I teach and train graduate students to do couples therapy. And then I teach an undergraduate relationship education course called Marriage 101, which has been has been featured in media stories, all over the world, because unfortunately we don't do a lot of relationship education. We have romanticized ideas of love without a lot of education. And then that work of, what I do in my office and what I do in the classroom I've been really interested in translating that to the general public. So I've now at this point written 2 relationship self-help books and
fantastic books, I might add.
Thank you. So that's me. I love talking about love and sex and relationship.
I have to say there's so many different ways we could take this conversation. And so I'm just going to plant the seed that you might have to come back at some point in the future, because I don't think we're going to get to all of the areas that I want to get to today. But I first just want to say thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And I think that Marriage 101 relationship class, that needs to be like a priority for every single couple. It really does. And I'm curious, how did you get interested in relationships?
Oh my gosh. Well, I went to college wanting to go to medical school. To me, college was like a necessary evil. I had to do it in order to get to medical school. I wanted to be a pediatrician my entire life. And that was my plan until I took a women's studies class. And I was like, oh, shoot, this is really throwing a wrench into the works, because what I realized was I was fascinated by relationships and systems and power and gender and connection and all of that kind of stuff, the more nuanced aspects of who we are as human beings. And so I shifted and went on to to get my PhD in counseling psychology at Northwestern. And even while there, I didn't know I wanted to study relationships, but then sort of one thing led to another, and I ended up at the Family Institute. And it has been just a really perfect fit, because I'm never bored, right? There's always some other way to turn the kaleidoscope, some other aspects to bring forward. And
I love that visual of turning the kaleidoscope, because there's so many layers to relationships. And you might get one area figured out, but another area still is maybe stuck or is unaware of, what's arising within the dynamic of two people.
That's right. That's right. And whatever you think you figured out in year 1 of a relationship, you have to figure it out again in year 5 and in year 10. Yes, it's so true.
Yeah. I was fascinated by couples from a really, really young age. I was with my ex-husband since I was 13 years old.
Wow.
And I had always known I wanted to work with couples, because even at 13 and 14 years old, I was fascinated with this idea of why some couples work and some don't. Mm-hmm. And I had discovered John Gottman in undergrad, and had I not been dating him, in my head, the story I told myself was I was going to go up to Seattle and go work in his love lab and delve into the couples work. And I didn't do that, but I never lost the interest and the curiosity and the fascination, because it's amazing anyone works, really.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, it's really, really amazing. Any of these relationships work out. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, just on a personal level, you were married, you have a couple of kids. Mm-hmm. How does that come into your own life? Because I know with my relationship with my fiance, we're both in the field, and we sometimes, or I get stuck saying, you teach this stuff, you should know how to do this all the time. Thinking, just because we're, so-called experts in a particular professional field, that's always going to translate in personal lives, which, to all you listening, damn it, we're still human.
That's right. My husband's favorite joke to tell, at cocktail parties, when people are like, oh boy, what's it like to be married to a couples therapist? My husband always thinks, he says in a very sweet voice, the best batting coaches in the NBA are actually the most terrible hitters themselves. So yes, it is. Right. I think I know for me, part of that resonance was around my childhood and the system that I grew up in, and being in a blended family, and being fascinated, as you're saying, about what happened. And I think also being little and feeling like when I was little, I couldn't help anybody feel better or feel differently. Right? I felt powerless and kind of helpless and small in the face of these problems and challenges that were big. Yeah. And so and I think I was drawn to mastery. And what I realized is that I'm not ever going to master this, but I certainly have sets of tools available at my disposal. Yeah. I know when I'm getting triggered and activated, I can turn towards my partner, even though my urge is to run and hide, right. Or to drop a bomb and then run and hide, really is
right. It's that damn human part of, the element. Yeah. And it's funny because with John and I joke that when we've been dating 4 years, I guess, got engaged recently, but when he was dating and women would find out he was a psychologist, and they would be like, oh my God, are you analyzing me right now? And he was like, well, I wasn't, but now maybe I should. But I have found so much of the power is just having the language to use around these tools.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. And so I your first book, Loving Bravely, that really came out of your course that you taught, right? Mm-hmm. So tell our listeners a little bit about that before we jump into the new book, because I read that book. It was actually a perfect book to read. I was on a little romantic getaway weekend at this cute little cottage on the river, and it was the perfect environment to just soak all of that in. And I just resonated with so much, again, personally and professionally. So tell the listeners a little bit about the Loving Bravely book, and maybe some of your favorite parts to share about the most important pieces. If someone could take away one thing that they can start utilizing in their relationship right now, what would that be?
Good. Okay. Yeah. What I was really invested in when I wrote Loving Bravely was I wanted to write a book that kind of flipped the script on all of the very proscriptive things that we do around people who are dating or our partner. We say, like, do this, don't do this. Here are the rules. Here are the 5 steps. Here's what you do, either to find a partner or to keep a partner. And what I wanted to do was really flip the script on that and provide a journey for a reader into their own interior. Because my deep, deep belief is if I cannot be a home to myself, there's no way I can be a home to you. And but we don't, it's not something, I think, especially in this modern era of kind of swiping for partners, right? It's very much like, what are you going to do for me? What are you going to bring to me? Is this the right person? Does this person have red flags? It's very much focused on the other. Right. And even when I sit with couples, right? Every couple I've ever sat with my entire career, session 1, they sit down, and if there was like a little thought bubble above each person's head, what would be inside the thought bubble would be, thank God we're here. Now this therapist and I can fix my partner. But that same thought bubble is in the other person's head as well. Right. Yeah, so easy to focus on the other guy. So what Loving Bravely does is it gives a journey into the interior so that I can really understand my relationship to relationships, and that there's an entire lineage that I brought in to our first date, to our first kiss, to our first anniversary, wherever it is on the journey, my whole history comes in with me. And so it's a journey.
And my ancestral history too, right? We're carrying a lot.
That's right. Oh, yeah. It's right. The whole around culture and gender and all that messaging and all those things. Exactly. So that's really how the book is organized in 20 sort of like lessons. Like there's 20 places on this journey where we like land and we unpack a bit. And then we gather ourselves up, we go to the next destination and we land and we unpack a little bit. And that's what that book is all about. So it explores, what's your relationship to forgiveness? What's your relationship to gender, dynamics? What's your relationship to conflict? What's your relationship to self-compassion?
So I know this isn't like a hugely broad question, but I'm still going to inquire about it. Of all the couples you see, do you see major themes that pop up, like the 1 or 2 main themes that cause conflict and discord in relationships?
I mean, the central question, I think everything kind of revolves around the central questions of being human, right? Which is like, am I okay? Do you see me? Do I matter?
Yeah.
The symptom, right? Often, mostly couples come in after one person has cheated. Oftentimes that is like the presenting problem is there in the wake of infidelity. So that's oftentimes what the presenting problem is somebody has cheated, or the couple hasn't made love in a very long time, or they're getting into a lot of arguments, right? That's sort of the front facing symptom. But the symptom needs, what we do then, as you know, because you do this as well, is we sort of unpack the symptom and go to the questions that are underlying it. And the questions that are underlying it are, do you see me? Do I matter? Am I okay? Lots of just around power and around connection, right? Those are the big things that we are craving. And when we don't have those, we end up falling into some pretty shady McGrady behaviors.
Yeah. And, there's so many different ways to tackle those questions too. There's multiple pathways which we can even explore that within a couple. And I always, whenever a new couple reaches out to me, I always first off thank them for the courage in reaching out. Because it's incredibly vulnerable to say, I'm going to expose myself and my wounds and my fears and my anxieties, because they likely haven't even done that in front of their partner, let alone in front of a stranger and their partner. And it's a really courageous act.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. It really is courageous. I think part of the healing aspect of being in couples therapy, part of what I think is healing about it, in addition, I think it's very healing, obviously, to have somebody who can hold the space for the relationship, but part of it is just that it's a declaration, right? For us to go to couples therapy is a declaration that we are having a hard time and we matter and we are investing in this. I think that's oftentimes like the healing one of the healing qualities of being in couples therapy is just, it's like, this is what we do. 6:00 on Tuesdays, we say we matter, this matters. But yeah, it is vulnerable as heck, and so much more vulnerable. I mean, individual therapy is very vulnerable, and I would never diminish that. I would just say that there is, as you're saying, something that's even more amplified in couples work, because sometimes the things I'm saying out loud in the presence of my partner, in the presence of our therapist, are things that I haven't even made real to myself.
Right. Yeah. And so it's holding that mirror up to myself, to my partner on really deep levels. Yeah. It's I love the challenge of the work. I say, and I try to teach my clients, if we can stay in that realm of curiosity and compassion rather than defensiveness and judgment, how can we just allow, without such quick defensiveness, to hear what your partner is saying, or assuming you know what they mean by what they're saying, right? Even just language. I get really nitpicky on language. Because language was so powerful and it's so emotionally charged. And my mom used to tell this joke when I was growing up of the surgeon in the middle of a surgery who says, oops. And the surgeon's assistant says, I know what I mean when I say oops. What do you mean when you say oops? And I explain that to couples because unless we're identifying even what we're meaning when we say certain words, we can have completely different frames of reference around it, which can completely impact our ability to even hear.
That's right. Absolutely. And it's so easy to assume that when I say this, of course you mean, of course you receive that the way that I am sending it. And it's why the Love Languages book has sold 87 gazillion copies, right? Because it just like the idea that what I value, what I translate as loving, what I need isn't what you need. Like just that's something that it's so easy. We become so egocentric. We talk about how kids are,
They're likely role modeling it from somewhere.
It just is our nature to be like, how could you not understand that when I say this is what it means?
Yeah. It was interesting. I took a walk with my girlfriend this morning, and she and I met on retreat, and we were both divorcing our high school sweethearts. And so we've been on this journey of both mindfulness and consciousness and awareness and relationships. And one of the things that we often talk about is, this idea around when in conflict in relationship, when there's discord, and each partner in the relationship has a different need around how to handle the discord. And even in my relationship with John, when we get stuck, like his pattern is he needs to withdraw a little bit and self-protect because he's spiraling into a shame story of I'm not good enough, I've hurt your feelings, and when you tell me you're hurt, I now think I'm all bad, and I need to withdraw and give myself the space before I can respond. And that withdrawal triggers my abandonment.
Right.
And I need to seek comfort and security during conflict and step towards so I can feel my nervous system relax and calm. And my girlfriend and I this morning were just talking about I always want to do it my way because I think it's quote better, right? But there's no better way in relationship. And yet it's the dance. It's that harmony and discord and ease and conflict dance that we're in so often.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it becomes when it becomes like, who's going to give the other person the thing they need first? Like, are you going to, will you let him step away first, or will he step towards you first? Like when it becomes then that's when it's like a battle of the wills.
Yeah.
And it's only what you guys are doing by naming it as a dance is it positions you guys shoulder to shoulder to look together at the dance and say like, wow, isn't that fast? Like, how about that?
Right.
How about that we need these things that are so different. And just from that perspective, then it becomes an act of generosity, right? Just to step towards you when he wants to step away. Or it becomes an act of, you can feel really proud that you can let him step away because he's going to come back, whatever.
Well, and it goes back to what you're saying of us being so egocentric. Like it's my assumption that for you to meet your need means you're ignoring me. Like it's not about my need. It's not about abandonment. Like it's just so fascinating how quickly these deeply rooted old stories and old belief systems come up.
Right.
It just,
I don't know. I've sort of given up on the idea that I'm going to get to the point where the old stuff doesn't come up. I think that my old stuff is going to always come up. But what I know is that I'm savvier about it, right? Takes me less time to realize that this is trauma, not truth, or less. I sink less down into shame than I used to. Or, it's just sort of the journey. It's a journey rather than it's like sort of like done. I think oftentimes our clients
we're never one and done. Yeah, and I think being able to just name that too, like one of the things I'll help guide my clients in doing, or I'll do in relationship, is just be like, wow, that seems like an old story, and I'm not your ex, or and I'm not your mother, or and this is not your childhood trauma. Like, to separate out, look how quickly we step into that wounded place. And I can see why that's hurting you now. And let's be curious of what's really coming up between just you and I, and differentiate. Is this the old story? Or is this something more in the present moment?
Beautiful. Yeah. I love those moments when I can help a client really imagine, like, when your partner starts to do this, that's something from her childhood, and then really like have compassion for it. Do you remember that story about how when she was little, she was all alone in her home and nobody was paying attention to her? Do you remember that story? And then if I can get the partner to remember that story and remember that wound is older and bigger than they are,
right?
Invite forward compassion, like, oh, I can soothe that little girl.
Yeah.
Right? I can be present. I can be part of the healing. That can be really helpful to invite forward that compassion as the antidote to defensiveness.
Yeah, I'll give the listeners an example of that something happened, because for you and I, this is our language, right? We can speak this and we can understand what we're saying, but I want to share a quick example to highlight what that looks like in practice, just for those listening saying, well, what do you mean? What would that look like, in my relationship? And this summer, I traveled to Europe with my daughters for a month, and John did not come with us, and that was really triggering for him. And he was really hurt. Like, at the root of it, he was hurt. He wasn't included on this trip. But what was coming out was some anger and defensiveness. And in the beginning, it actually started with the trip I went on with one of my daughters to Ecuador in the spring. And when I got home, he was really triggered. And I'm like, I didn't do anything wrong. And I stayed in that space of curiosity and compassion. And as we just held this space for a while, you're feeling a lot of pain right now. You were really hurt that I was gone. What was underneath that?
Beautiful.
And what he'd realized was, when he was a young boy, his parents used to travel to Europe and leave him home with a babysitter, and he didn't emotionally feel super safe. And so it was so fascinating to then, when I went to Europe a few months later, knowing that this was an unsafe story for him, then when I was gone and he was feeling triggered, I could take it personally. But I stayed in that space of, wow, you're really hurting right now. And this is, activating this really old story that isn't about me, but it's making this feeling, this felt sense in his body familiar. Mm-hmm. And had I not had the awareness to hold the space or the curiosity for what it could have been about, I would have been reactive. We would have fought. We would have been in arguments. We would have been disconnected, Would it have been potentially relationship ending? Maybe for some people.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But it's so important to just hold that space of, wow, what's this really about right now? Like, peeling back those layers.
I love that so much. I love so much also the narrative arc of it, that like trip 1 was when you were really activated and you kind of discovered this wound. And then trip 2, you guys were able to, I'm sure, do a bit more like forecasting and preparedness and preventing that from happening again. Because now you know a bit more of like the pattern, or the fact that you're bumping up against, we're walking into one of those moments, one of those chapters where this may get kicked up for us. What do we want to do to prevent disconnection?
Yeah. And then even with the best, well laid out plan, emotions are still emotions, and they're not logical. And the plan was logical and it made perfect sense, but emotionally the emotions were still present. Yeah. And how not to take it all personal. Like, I love that, that's the one of the 4 agreements that I love the most, the Don Miguel Ruiz 4 agreements of don't take everything so personal. Because it's rarely all just about us, right? Or our partner's issues are not really our fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, so in working with couples, one of the things that I know John says to a lot of the men he works with is, part of the man box culture and socialization of men, and how women have evolved more and men need to catch up, and all that rhetoric of that socialization difference is, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility.
Yes.
Right. Like if it's triggering to your partner, it's not your fault this happened, but your partner is sitting here saying, I'm hurt. So it is your responsibility to do something with that right now.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yep.
So powerful.
It really is. It is. It's the reason why relational self-awareness has to happen in a context. Like, it's not like I can, go off into the woods and heal myself and then partner with somebody and have it be easy breezy, smooth sailing. Like, the nature of partnership is it's designed to, like, it will stir up stuff. So there needs to be enough relational self-awareness that when we hit a bump in the road, rather than just making you wrong or making me wrong, I can hold a little bit of curiosity for, okay, so what is familiar about this? What does this remind me of? And be willing to kind of look at that part of it. Like, what is this moment with my partner stirring in me that's bigger, older than this moment? And without that skill, conflict is incredibly dangerous and toxic, and it becomes something where really, like, as you're saying, like relationship ending.
Yeah. And it's hard to know sometimes with couples of when is that work healing and when is it more damaging? Because sometimes some of these old wounds or old stories, I believe, can only be worked out while in relationship. Because some of the dynamics we can't work out on our own because it's in conjunction with this other person of, these dynamics that are reoccurring. And so I always find that question fascinating too. Like, at what point can we use this relationship to heal? Is the relationship supposed to heal ourselves? And at what point do we say, no, this is too much to carry?
Right. Yes. That's the question that I got more than any other question when Loving Bravely came out, was like, what if I'm willing to do this work but my partner isn't? And
What's your best answer for that?
Well, my best answer is something about, I think there's a difference between being a bit like developmentally slower to this work versus being in contempt of this work. So I think especially, and this question is often asked by heterosexual women who feel like they, because of socialization, because women have been, at least given more opportunity to talk about feelings than men have been given traditionally. Sometimes women will feel like my male partner just isn't where I am. Like, they don't have the kind of they're not as facile with their interior as I am. And I think that there's a difference between a man in this example, who says, I never learned this stuff, but I'm willing, like, let's go to therapy, or I'll listen to this podcast, or I'll read this book. That's very different than somebody who rolls their eyes and says, I don't believe in therapy, or feelings are a sign of weakness. I think that's a problem. I think that is, it's very difficult to create intimacy between that kind of difference. I'm all for love bridging differences, but that's a difference that is really challenging. As somebody who's hunkered down and who says, no, I will not look inside. It's either A or it's B. There is no gray.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because I get that question as well. And one of the ways, and I answer it very similarly, to me, it's about that growth mindset. Am I willing to learn? Am I open to learning a new skill? And John and I are starting to launch relationship coaching, and we have a couples retreat coming up in September in Costa Rica. And, when people ask us, like, how do I know if this is worthwhile for us to delve into? And in our couples workshops that we lead, we start off with that question of kind of the growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. Because I think many, and in your example, many men, heterosexual men, partly is that socialization, give that response of, this is me, love me for me. Like, this is who I am, take it or leave it. And I've seen that quite a bit, versus this is me and I know it's hurting you and or us, and I'm willing to learn a new skill.
It's a huge difference.
It's a huge
difference. I don't think it ever has to be, to me, it doesn't have to be equal. Like, my husband, if I asked him to read something or listen to something, he would do it, but he doesn't seek it. But he is willing to he doesn't have to be as nerdy as I am about this. because I think sometimes, I think there's a risk that if there are two people who are so in this, it can become like navel gazing, right? And you can like this paralysis of analysis kind of a thing where you just go round and round and round. And there needs to be like the ability to sequester the reflection and just be able to like play and be in the moment and be a bit more light, right? And not tying everything to our traumas. But just the fact that I know a part of what is helpful for me is I know when we need to have those conversations, he will have them. He's not closed off them. He's not going to go, seek it out on his own necessarily.
Right. And to not fault the men that they're likely not going to seek it out on their own. And that doesn't mean they're not open. Just means not they're inclined or their habit or pattern or first desire. So it's a good segue. You talked about being light and playful. So it's a good way to start talking about sex, because I love talking about sex with my clients too. And I find so many couples don't talk about it. And it's the focus of your new book that just recently came out, Taking Sexy Back. So tell us how and why you felt this book needed to come into the world and what you're hoping it's going to provide. And why do you love talking about sex?
That's right. Well, I maybe similar to you. I mean, growing up in our mental health culture, as a psychologist and somebody who's specializing in marriage and family therapy, I was not trained in how to think about sexuality, talk about sexuality, support couples around sexuality. What I was told is once you get a couple to argue less and be more effective in their communication, the sex will follow. That's all it is secondary. It's a secondary issue. Like, do your job well and they will go off and be fine sexually. And so that was, and so it reinforced in me this, like all the splits that exist within me around where where my sexual self lives and how much I can be both nerdy and, fascinated by the world of the erotic. Like how much do I get to hold on to those parts of myself? And it just is, I can see how much I've seen how much with my clients, sex is maybe not the explicit presenting problem, but oftentimes not being harnessed as an antidote to the problems, right? Like not being tapped as a resource that is really supportive. And when a couple has that like nice cushion of touch and play and eroticism and pleasure, it can buffer some of the pains of like domestic life and irritation and frustration. And then I think also just working on a campus with my undergraduate students and my graduate students, like just being so aware of how inadequate American sex education is and how I was never given the sex education that I needed as I was coming into adulthood. And certainly those who are coming of age now don't have the tools they need to, it's not about, I think there is something about being safe. And I think sex education is focused on being safe. And certainly that's a part of it. But where are we talking about pleasure and entitlement and knowledge of our bodies and connection? And even when we think about how we talk about consent, the way we talk about consent is very like transactional, like negotiate consent versus putting consent in a larger conversation about mutuality and connection and giving and receiving and emotional attunement.
Yeah.
So anyway, so for all those reasons, I was like, okay, it scares me to write a book about sex, but it needs to be done. And I felt like I had some things I wanted to say. I hope this book will be read by, the audience is really emerging adult women. So I hope that women will find the book as they are growing into their sexual selves, and this will start them off in a way that they feel really entitled and empowered to understanding who they are, what they want, where their yeses are, where their nos are. But I also know already from just the early readers who read sort of pre-copies that a lot of women who are older than emerging adults have found the book to be supportive, because if we didn't have this and we don't have it at some point, I want us to feel like we get to reclaim our sexuality as something that is ours, and to feel connected to it and to feel like we understand it, so that then it becomes a place of pleasure and connection.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, there's so many things. So I'm going to say a couple of things so I don't forget to say them, and then we'll go into one of them. A couple months back, I interviewed a sex researcher for the podcast. Her name is Melanie Curtin, and she's a writer, and she had beautiful language around how to talk to, especially a new partner, around some of our sexual boundaries. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that she would say is, if, let's say, a new partner wanted to perform oral sex on her, which she said, I love, but she didn't feel comfortable returning because she feels like that's something she holds for a more committed relationship. Mm-hmm. And some of the language she would use was, I'm not available for that right now. And it was such a gentle way that I think, and again, there's so many great ways in your book that we don't have the framework to talk about some of these things. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think it's such an important conversation. Yeah. And especially with the young generation right now, where they don't even know how to talk to each other, period. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a couple of teenage clients, and I talk to them about, their dating life and their emerging sexuality. And with the Snapchat culture, they're not even used to having face-to-face conversations before they're hooking up.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so how do we then go from that to having sex, to then naming our needs, mm-hmm. and having questions and knowing our boundaries, and combine that with the porn culture of what men are thinking women want or enjoy or what feels good?
Right.
It's going to be a big challenge for this upcoming generation.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Right. And we didn't, we're talking about like sort of inherit, like sort of legacies and inheritance. Yeah. It's not like we ever did a great job of talking about sex, but it was like you could have a path maybe if you only had one sexual partner, you were married by 22, at least you were working it out within that little container.
Right.
So what happens is we didn't set up the next generation, the younger generations, to do what now you absolutely, as you're saying, there's no getting around it with pornography and people entering into marriage, into committed partnerships so much later and at such a lower rate, that really everybody deserves to be able to have those conversations about what feels good, what doesn't feel good. I love the language of I'm not available for that, I am available. And how to even start with what are the ways in which I would even know if I'm available for that? Exactly.
And I, when I read this book, and I really loved it, I have to say, I'm not just saying that because I'm interviewing you, I really appreciated everything that you put forth in this book, because it's not information that's easily known, mm-hmm. of how to enter into this space. And there's a whole great section on mindfulness around sex. Right? Of just being present with whatever is arising without quickly to react or judge or push away or grasp onto, and that speaks to my heart because I focus so much on mindfulness. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious, I know you have a daughter, correct?
Yes.
And how old is she?
She's 15.
So how do you talk to her about sex? Because I'm really fascinated with the professional versus the personal, because I've got two teenage daughters, 16 and almost 14. And I really want them to have that sex positive awareness and relationship. And yet they're not into dating yet. They're not really into boys. So I feel like I haven't had to have those conversations just yet. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, as positive as I am that I wouldn't be open with clients, I'm like, ooh, but I'm a mom and these are my baby girls. And how have you, just on a personal note, started to have that? I mean, you're sitting at home writing this book, so clearly it's a topic of conversation, I'm assuming, in your home.
Right.
So how have you entered into that to maybe give some advice to our listeners who believe this but still have teenage daughters at home to say, ooh, how do I actually handle this?
Yes. Yeah.
It's still a sticky conversation, right?
Well, it is. It is for sure. I have two things that come right to my mind. One is that, my daughter, my son and I are more likely to have like face-to-face, long, meandering conversations. That's just his nature.
And how old is he?
He's 17.
Okay.
But also still not really part of a dating, the dating world, but he's definitely just kind of interested in engaging a long conversation. My daughter is a bit more, she's really pragmatic. She wants to be a surgeon or a chef. She's like, give me the procedure, like boom, boom, boom. So with her, I know I need to do these little, what my mentor used to call like these truth bombs. Like oftentimes it's in the car, we're driving somewhere, and I will just say, I want to tell you just a little bit about this one particular thing. Are you available? oh, mom, she does her thing, right? She rolls her eyes. Okay, mom, go ahead. What do you need to say? And I'll talk for a bit about whatever it is that I just want to kind of give her a little, masturbation or, how do you just sort of different terms that I don't want her. I've said to both of our kids, there's nothing I won't talk to you about. And I would so much rather you ask me than go to Google, right? Because unfortunately, right, when we put things into Google, like we're not directed to really lovely, thoughtful websites. But both of our kids know about this website called Scarleteen, which is a really great resource.
You spell that, Scarleteen?
Scarleteen.
Okay.
Scarleteen.
I've never heard of that. And what do they do?
It's just a really well curated website of just sexual health information that is.
That's a great resource. Thank you for that.
Diverse and inclusive and sex positive. Because what's going to happen, most likely is our kids are going to get sent to, porn sites and I don't need to be anti-erotic materials to be anti-erotic materials as a source of sex education. Right. I think that's there are lovely reasons that people choose to have erotic materials as part of their lives, but I don't want that to be what provides my teens with their sex education. So if we aren't willing to open the door to those conversations, that's what's going to end up filling in. So I think right now, because neither of our kids are really exploring that with partners, I think mostly what I'm trying to do is just like lay a foundation where I am seen as a resource and a source of availability, and just talking about sex as a part of life, as a part of experience, as a part of love, as a part of connection. So really avoiding fear-based language. But the most important thing I think for parents is to be willing to do their own work. Like I want parents to be thinking about like, who were you sexually at 15? What did you need from the generation above you at that age? Like, what do you wish somebody would have said to you? What do you wish somebody would have talked to you about? What was on your mind? Because sometimes what parents say to their kids comes from a place of wound, right? Or from a place of fear.
I was just going to say that fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a parent's willingness to kind of look at their own sexual story, their own relationship with their erotic self, the more a parent is willing to do that, the more what's going to come across the bow is gentle, curious, opening, inviting, creating.
And normal, right? This is normal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm really open with my daughters about a lot. And I've always tried to, whenever they have a question, to not have the reaction of, oh, that's a really big question.
Uh-huh.
And it's a matter of fact question. It's a matter of fact response. And sometimes I'm like, why is no other adult present to hear this or help me in this question? And I just laugh about it of, you know what? I wasn't able to ask those questions. I didn't have the kind of conversation ability when I was their age to be like, can you have sex standing up? I mean, or whatever it is, right? That my daughter asked after watching a Friends episode when she was like, 9.
Awesome.
I never would have asked that.
Yes.
And so I love that. That's even a question my kids, and that's like the really lighthearted ones, but to be able to just create that environment is sometimes easier said than done. And I think if I had a wish for my daughters, and I have yet to communicate this clearly to them because I don't think they're in that space yet, but it's that idea of know how to please yourself before you ask someone to please you, because until you know what you want and what feels good, there's no way anyone else is going to be able to navigate that, that map for you.
Yep.
And
that's so huge. That is so huge. And you will say that to your girls. And I want us all to be saying that to our girls and to our boys to understand their own, like how sex for them ties to the idea of sex ties to emotion and identity. Because I think that's for as much as we aren't talking to our girls, we really aren't talking to our boys. And especially in this moment where there's so much I think there's a lot of fear around male sexuality as being predatory, and don't do this, and this is dangerous, and this will get you in trouble. it cuts boys off from the ability to have conversations about just the beauty of sex, the positivity of sex, sex is a part of, of who you are as a man, and a pathway for beautiful healing and connection and emotion. So yes, I love that message to your daughters about just knowing yourself. That's a really important one.
Yeah. And you don't need a boy to please you. Like, please yourself and let the boy be additive.
That's right.
And, so one last thing. And what do you find, and especially as you delved into this sexuality and relationship work and writing this new book, what would be your advice to couples who maybe never had a good sex life? This is like where I want your really honest answer, not just the clinical response. Do you really believe couples who've never, ever, ever from day one had a good sexual connection can find it or can create it or can build it? It's a big question.
It's a hard question. I think if both partners said from a place of choice rather than obligation, if both partners said, I am deeply curious to see what we might be able to cultivate, then I would say yes.
Yeah.
But if it's one partner is like, I will if you want to, right, or the other person is like, we have to, or I'm leaving, then you may get like a bump for a hot minute, but it's not going to really be like a transformation.
Yeah.
And it would probably be like working specifically with a sex therapist, or going to a retreat that really is like a retreat that is a celebration of the erotic, where that is, but it would be work, and it would be work that both would have to declare as something that's valuable and meaningful that we want to choose rather than because we have to. What do you think?
It's a really interesting thing. And chemistry is powerful. And we also start attributing so many stories to our sex life. Mm-hmm. And I think we've got to look at, Esther Perel, and I don't think it's her original quote, but she's the one who I've heard say it, is sex is emotion in motion. Mm-hmm. 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 And I fully understand that now, being in the relationship that I'm in, and just when you're really aware how much you can see all the layers of your life and relationship showing up in your sex life. Because it's there. It's reflective in so many ways. And I find that concept so powerful.
Yep. I know it's making me think of, and this really surprised me when I read this, in Sue Johnson's book, Love Sense. She writes about when she feels like, in her experience as a clinician, when there's a couple where they really, this is different. This is a loss of love, where there just really is like a total like detachment and retreat and really thick walls. She feels like she's not able to bring a couple back from two really thick walls of massive detachment.
Yeah.
So I don't...
Because then sex might be even used as like a punishment to the other partner too, if they're that detached. Like, I don't want to... You've hurt me, or I'm so disconnected, I don't even want to step towards.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. So so it would require forgiveness. So I guess it would depend on what's the relationship between like the lack of sexual chemistry and that disengagement. If they're both, if that's all flatline, then it may be that like sort of the mercy is to say like, we've tried and I release you and you release me, and but that is, it's just so personal. And as a clinician, I don't, I know that there are clinicians who will say like, I don't see a future here. I don't do that as a clinician. I will say, these are the things that are red flags. These are the things that are, pretty troubling, but I would never tell a couple, I think you should divorce. I think you are done.
The last question, because we've got to wrap up soon.
Oh, yes.
I told you I could talk to you for hours. You recently had an Instagram post that talked about how many nerves are on the clitoris. So share a little clitoris information, because I know women don't know all that much as we think we should know about our own bodies. But I saw that post and I just thought, I'm going to ask her to talk more about that.
It was so fun in the Taking Sexy Back book to write about the clitoris and about the vulva in general. Like, in fact, when we say a woman's vagina, the vagina is only the term for the opening, right? The opening of the passage. The vulva is the entire sort of like flower, if you will. And man, the clitoris is fascinating, right? It's a sex organ that has no purpose in life but pleasure. And I just feel like if women really felt like that the power of that truth, like I have a part of my body that is only here to provide pleasure, how would they relate to their bodies a bit differently? How would their partners are male or female relate to their body differently? Like what a different world we would live in if we really honored and celebrated that versus what we've done in our culture, which is just really not even talk about the clitoris or understand it. We didn't even no one mapped the full anatomy of the clitoris until the year 2000. So I
read that in the book. That is wild to me. Mm-hmm. Only 20 years ago, scientifically has this been documented.
It's so stupid.
It's crazy. Like it's no wonder women have been so confused because we've never given us scientific space to exist.
That's right. And it's unfortunately we need science because you could have asked, 1,000 years ago, you could have asked a woman, what part of your body feels really good to touch? And the woman would have said 1,000 years ago, my clit feels really good. Right. But instead we just really maligned, right? We think about the surgery, female relation surgeries and just kind of the way that the heterosexual sexual script is so focused on penetration, and penetration may really engage that clitoral tissue, but it may not. And so what if we design sexual scripts that really celebrated and integrated the clitoris?
Yes. Well, cheers to that.
Yes.
So, all right, ladies, go integrate your clitoris. This is your wisdom of the day. They're going to come home listening to this and say, honey, I just heard I should integrate my clitoris.
It's time for us to integrate this clitoris of mine.
Well, Alexandra, I will have all of your links to how people can find you on social media and, of course, your new book and however else they can just learn more about you. And, I've been following you on Instagram for a long time. We've been connected on Facebook, and you really put out great tools. So at the very least, people should follow you so they can continue to learn these nuggets of wisdom that social media so greatly helps us get out to bigger audiences that are outside of our clinical area to, see it face to face. So thank you so much for your time today. And I love the work that you're doing, and the books that you've written are so easy to read and make so much sense. And I love when I read a great book like that I get jealous. I really want to write my books that are in my head and in due time, but to be able to present complex information in a way that people can take in, I think is what you've done with your book. So cheers to that.
Thank you. It was so fun to talk to you, Jory. It was really fun. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. All right. Take care.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat. Visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.